It's the final of the Opera Euro Rapid online tournament. Magnus Carlsen, world champion, faces Wesley. So, if you recall, in set 1, that was tied 2-2. So, they go into the second set, and this is the first game. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And do consider supporting us on PayPal or Patreon. So, first game, Wesley So with the white pieces. It's this very trendy, very popular Rossolimo, and Carlsen playing e6, one of the main moves. Knight e7 and c3. So, white is preparing to build a big centre with d4. And I've always liked this line for white very much. I think this is a really straightforward way for white to play. You want to build with d4, often you get a kind of French type position actually. And Carlsen knows this well with white. I remember very early on in his career, he played queen e2 in this position and blew away Radjabov. That was the game in 2009, long time ago. But so Magnus knows how dangerous this line is. Wesley played rook e1, also a very natural move. a4, that's nice. Typical of these kind of positions. Almost has a bit of a character of the Spanish, where you play a4 to break up these pawns or gain control of an open file. And here very quickly Magnus took on d4, which is actually inaccurate. I mean, he played this instantly, but the correct move here is to play pawn takes pawn on c3 with the idea that this knight can come to b4 to hassle that bishop. I mean, it's still very complex. After this, you have to contend with this move d5. It's very complicated, but basically that is the main line. But instead of taking on c3, the normal move, Carlsen played this. And the problem now is that black does not have that b4 square available. And this is basically just a really pleasant position for white. You've got this huge centre. Of course, black can play something like d5 and get a French kind of position. But this is a French where white is really secure because that d4 pawn is well protected. So Carlsen continued like this. Knight d2 from Wesley. Knight a5. And now g3 is a good move. Just taking squares away here and perhaps preparing to move that bishop to d3 and then it won't be hassled by the knight. Bishop e7, h4, excellent move by Wesley. So he's going to push the knight away. So if black castles, that's already very unpleasant. And you know, white with this just wonderful central control. So after 2 minutes thought, after h4, what did Carlsen do? Well, he gave up the bishop. Incredible. I mean, it looks like madness, and it is madness. Because in this position, after rook e3, well, the queen on its own really can't achieve that much. And the game went like this. Basically, Wesley is consolidating. Pieces brought over, excellent. Knight e5, excellent move, offering an exchange of queens. And, well, really, Carlsen can't avoid that because there's a bishop potentially coming out here. So the exchange of queens, and basically here, white is just a piece up for not very much. And the game ended like this. Bishop g4, threatening this. Rook f6. Bishop g5, and now the rook is just overloaded. And after this, well, black is losing more material. Carlsen took here, and he's now a rook down, and he just resigned the game. So what a disastrous start to the day for Magnus Carlsen. Wesley winning very, very easily. Second game, well, Magnus came out punching a very close game, but it ended in a draw. So they went into game 3, Wesley with the white pieces. Now, instead of the Sicilian, Carlsen played e4, e5. So gioco piano, Both players are very experienced, but I can tell you this game was anything but piano. It was more forte. This was quite an extraordinary game. So, just to recap, Wesley is 1 game up, and this is game 3. So the player's making all these very normal moves. Bishop tucks back on a7, the knight swings round. Bishop e6, bishop b5. And here in the recent Tata Steel tournament, Duda played knight g3 against Carlsen. That's a pretty reasonable move. Wesley went for the more straightforward d4, which is fine. c6 and the bishop came back, but knight g6. So, you know, these pieces lining up pretty nicely, but white has a nice center with the pawn on d4. But white always has to be very, very careful of that bishop. h3. And now if white gets one more move to play knight g3, then he's secured his kingside and can look forward with confidence. But knight h5 really sharpens up the play. This is now very, very tricky. So bishop e3, knight f4. And this is the problem with the pawn on h3. When the knight gets here, you know, you can't drive that knight away with g3 because h3 hangs. And this bishop is under fire, so bishop c2. And queen c8 from Carlsen. Well, you know, you couldn't be more direct. It is just blatantly obvious what black is preparing. The big cannon is lining up and he's going to try and blast through on h3. And I mean, I was kind of amazed at how Wesley played in this position. He just played bishop b3, which just invites black to take here. Seems to me that, you know, moving this knight back would be a kind of, well, a pragmatic approach, so that if there's a sacrifice here, then the queen, after taking the piece, then the queen can come to f3 to defend. I mean, this is still, it's a very unclear position. But bishop b3 is just tempting fate. And here Carlsen took on d4. Now, why didn't he take on h3? This is kind of amazing. So, just to repeat, he took on d4 here, but let's just have a little look at bishop takes h3. It's interesting. He'd already sacrificed incorrectly in game 1. So, you know, maybe his judgment was clouded by that and he was thinking, do I want to risk sacking on the king side again? In fact, this is incredibly strong. So watch this here. Now you can play queen takes h3, but even better is a4, just flicking in this move. Whole point of this is to distract the bishop from this diagonal. And let's just see. And so if bishop c4, then you can always blast the bishop out with d5. So let's look at the move bishop takes a4. Now queen takes h3, threatening queen g2 mate. Bishop takes, knight takes. The point of this is to clear the e3 square. Knight e3, so defends g2, and now black needs to bring more pieces over. So you take, and then rook e8. So here's the idea. Rook e6, rook g6, and checkmate. So now you can see that obviously, you know, it was a good idea to distract the bishop. Fine. So the bishop comes back to b3 to cover here. Then d5. And if that's taken, we can take rook takes knight and queen g2. Okay, so what about knight g5? Then the queen is attacked. Let's go back to h6. Queen g4. And now, simple tactic, queen takes knight. Knight h3, we win the queen back, and black is a pawn up, if I've counted correctly. Yep, and this one can be taken next. It looks good for black. Now, that's a long variation, but that's just a kind of illustration of how a4 can be used. And Carlsen said afterwards, well, it's not kind of a novel idea. You see this idea in this variation quite often. He said it's not a novel thing. With a4, everything works. And actually, he said that this idea of playing queen takes knight and checking on h3, he'd seen this. There was another variation where this was possible, and he'd simply overlooked it as black. So, his calculation was not all there. But he kind of didn't trust himself. He felt as though that was the right move, but didn't go for it. So instead he took on d4. Okay, we're back to reality. This is actually the game continuation. And bishop takes knight. Now, Wesley should just take with the bishop. Take with the pawn. And, well, it's about equal, basically. This knight's still quite good, but basically white has avoided the worst. Incredibly, Wesley took on d4 with the queen. And that sets up all kinds of nasty threats here. But remarkably, Carlsen took on b3. He could have played knight takes g2. So I repeat, this did not happen, but let's just have a quick look. King takes knight, check, and knight h4. That's why it's unbelievably dodgy to have recaptured with the queen, because it sets up a huge fork on f3. And let's say white defends, and now there's a simple mechanism. Bishop g2 threatening queen h3 and queen h1 mate. Shocking. Magnus said that he had completely overlooked this simple idea of bishop g2 and queen h3 mate. Incredible. But he felt that that was winning, but somehow couldn't prove it, so he didn't go for it. So instead he took here. Shocking. It's still possible to take here. It's not quite as clear as before, but, well, by this stage Magnus, well, he was kind of going for other ideas. And again, I was kind of amazed that Wesley didn't simplify here. He could have just taken here, getting rid of one of those knights. Once you get rid of one of those knights, then you can simplify the position. The sacrifices are not going to work. But instead, boy oh boy, this is like prodding the crocodile. Because, of course, eventually it's going to be time to sack. This, of course, it's not as dangerous now with pieces exchanged, but still, there was no need for Wesley to go in for this. It's still pretty messy. Check threatened. But knight h2. Maybe Wesley just thought he's okay here because his queen is coming across. But, Magnus does have 3 pawns for the piece. It's still quite tricky. And knight f5. It's, other attacking ideas were possible. But basically Wesley manages to survive into an endgame. So now it's knight against 3 pawns. But white is stable. I think that's the thing. There is a stable blockading square for that knight on e3. So actually, this one doesn't hold too much danger for white. And, well, all things considered, it's probably about equal. Certainly in rapid play, it's very hard for white to prove an advantage here. Oh, it's still tricky. So Magnus clears the way for the pawns to advance. And b5, of course, shuts out the rook. The pawns advance. It looks a bit scary, but with white's active rook, then it's possible to hold the position. And here, well, Wesley was just thinking about getting to safety, and now, of course, here it's going to be a draw. As long as white is sensible. Of course, if black is allowed to check the king back and get in with the king and pawn, then it's different. But, of course, we can check the king away and now the danger has passed. So in this position, check. Of course, if the king comes in, then you can check on c8 and take on here. So here they just repeated the position. Draw. So after game 3, the score was still 2-1 in Wesley So's favour. But I found that an extraordinary game, extraordinary in the sense that Wesley tempted fate, asking for, begging for Carlsen to sacrifice, and then Carlsen basically just bottled it at the critical moments and couldn't see the win. Now, I know it's rapid, but this was more a case of Carlsen not quite trusting his judgment. So that meant after 3 games, Carlsen went into game 4 and he had to win game 4 to tie the second set. I'll show you what happened there in the next video.